In the dusty corners of American history, some photographs hold mysteries that are hard to explain. Today, we are looking at one of the most unsettling images from the early 1900s. A seemingly normal family portrait from 1906 contains a detail so shocking it has haunted historians for over 100 years. At first, it looks like a tender moment between a mother and her child, but a closer look reveals something far darker. Before we begin, if you enjoy this type of story, leave a like to support me. I'm also working on another channel with even more fascinating content. You can find it in the description below. Let's explore this eerie mystery together. The photograph first appeared in 2019 during an estate sale in Providence, Rhode Island. Margaret Chen, a collector of old photographs, was sorting through a box of uncatalogued images when she discovered it. It was a formal studio portrait, the kind families often had made in the early 1900s. The sepia-toned photo showed a woman sitting in an elaborate wooden chair, her dark Victorian dress flawless, her expression calm. In her arms, she held what looked like an infant wrapped in white christening clothes. Margaret almost overlooked it. She had seen hundreds of similar portraits, stiff poses, serious expressions, the formal style of early photography, when people had to sit perfectly still for several seconds. But something made her take a second look. Something about the way the mother's hands were placed, something about the shadows in the infant's wrappings. She held the photograph up to the light streaming through the window. The afternoon sun revealed details hidden in the dim room. Margaret's hand shook. The photograph slipped and fell to the hardwood floor. "Are you okay?" asked the estate coordinator, a young woman named Jessica, who was nearby. Margaret couldn't speak. She just pointed at the photograph. Jessica picked it up, glanced at it, then looked closer. Her face went pale. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What is that?" They stared at the photo in silence. The mother wasn't just holding a baby. In the crook of her other arm, partly hidden by the folds of the gown, was something else, something that shouldn't be there. The more they looked, the stranger it became. On the back of the photo, in faded brown ink, was a simple note: Mrs. Catherine Hartwell and children, Providence Studio, March 1906. Children, plural. Margaret bought the photo for $5 and took it to her apartment in downtown Providence, unable to shake the uneasy feeling it gave her. That evening, she scanned it into her computer and zoomed in, studying every detail. Catherine Hartwell, the mother, looked to be in her late 20s or early 30s. Her hair was styled tightly, as was common at the time. Her eyes looked straight into the camera with a calm expression, or at least that's what Margaret first thought. The longer she looked, the more she wondered if it was really calm, or something else: resignation, denial, or a carefully practiced blankness to hide a secret. The baby in her right arm was swaddled in typical christening clothes, layers of white cotton and lace, with a small cap on its head. Only the face was visible, and even that was partly shadowed. Margaret adjusted the contrast and brightness on the image. The baby's face became clearer, and she felt her stomach tighten. Something was off. The eyes were too still. The skin looked waxy. But it was the object in Catherine's left arm that made no sense, partly hidden beneath the white gown. Its shape was clear once seen, and once seen, it could not be unseen. Margaret spent the first night researching everything about Catherine Hartwell and Providence in 1906. The city was thriving, full of industry and immigrant families. People often documented their lives through studio portraits. But what moment was this meant to preserve? And why would any mother pose like this? The more Margaret searched, the more questions she had. The more she looked at the photograph, the more she felt that something deeply wrong had been captured in that Providence studio in March 1906, hidden in plain sight for over a century. Her research led her to the Providence Historical Society, where early 1900s city records were stored. She asked for anything on the Hartwell family. After 2 days, an archivist named David brought her a thin folder with census records, a marriage certificate, and a few newspaper clippings. Catherine Hartwell, born Catherine Morrison in 1878, had married Thomas Hartwell in 1902. Thomas was a foreman at the Gorham Manufacturing Company, one of the city's main employers. They lived in a modest home on Broad Street in a working-class neighborhood. The 1905 census listed Catherine, Thomas, and a daughter named Mary, born in 1903. No other children were recorded, but the photograph was from March 1906, and the back mentioned children. Plural. Margaret felt a chill as she read further. A newspaper notice from February 1906 said the infant son of Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Hartwell had died after a brief illness. Only 4 weeks had passed before the photograph was taken. Margaret wondered, was the baby in the photo the dead infant? Could this be a post-mortem photograph, a common practice at the time, meant to preserve a child's memory? But post-mortem portraits were usually clearly memorialized. This had been catalogued as a regular family portrait, and it had another object in Catherine's left arm that didn't fit any explanation. David, the archivist, asked what she was trying to learn. Margaret explained the photo and asked about post-mortem photography. He said it was common when a child died, especially infants, usually posed peacefully, sometimes with family members. Margaret showed him the image. David stared at it, discomfort growing. The baby could be post-mortem, he admitted, but what's next to it? The object was roughly the same size as the infant, wrapped in similar fabric, but its proportions were wrong. The shape of the fabric suggested something that was definitely not a child. Margaret asked if there were other records of the Hartwell family. David shook his head. Nothing beyond 1906. He offered to check deeper archives, which Margaret agreed. Over 3 days David searched. While Margaret studied the photograph, she contacted historical photography experts. Everyone agreed it was highly unusual. The mother holding 2 objects, the strange composition. Nothing matched standard practices. One expert, Dr. Sarah Chen from Brown University, examined the original photo with special equipment. "This is extraordinary," she murmured. The photographer clearly wanted both objects visible, but tried to hide one. It's like the mother wanted to show something without being direct. This photo hides a truth in plain sight. Margaret's next lead came from an online forum about historical mysteries. A user called Rhodes Archive sent a message. Check the Providence Studio Registry, March 1906. The photographer noted something strange that day. Margaret immediately contacted David. He found the studio ledgers. The entry for March 14, 1906 read, Mrs. Catherine Hartwell, family portrait, special circumstances, payment $12, triple standard rate, session after hours. Client insisted on specific arrangement. Negative kept per customer request for future prints. Margaret's pulse raced. Triple the rate, after hours, special circumstances. What was so important, and why did the photographer keep the negative? David explained surviving negatives might be in private collections. Margaret tracked down Robert Mills, a retired photographer and collector. In his Cranston storage unit, she found a box of glass negatives. On the 23rd plate, she saw Catherine Hartwell with 2 wrapped objects. Robert developed a new print from the negative. When Margaret saw it, her blood ran cold. The object in Catherine's left arm was infant-sized, wrapped like the other, but where a face should have been, there was nothing human. Catherine's face, now clear, was not peaceful. It was blank, haunted, staring past the camera, as if she had seen something no one could understand. On the back of the glass negative, in the photographer's handwriting, was a note, "May God have mercy on this family. I should not have photographed this, but she begged me. She said it was the only way to show the truth." Margaret then tried to find out what happened to the Hartwell family after March 1906. Records showed that in April 1906, Catherine was admitted to Butler Hospital, a psychiatric institution, for severe depression and claims of witnessing impossible events. Her husband remarried in 1909. Kathy Ryan was released that year and vanished from records, as if she had never existed. Finally, Margaret discovered a letter from the photographer, Albert Fletcher, dated May 1906. He explained that Mrs. Hartwell brought 2 bundles, her dead infant son and another bundle that he could not describe. She insisted they be photographed together. Fletcher's letter revealed he believed it was something not of natural origin, and that Catherine was not mad. She was trying to document something that should not exist. Margaret sat in the reading room surrounded by documents and the new high-resolution print. She knew the facts. A baby died, a mother had a secret photographed, and she held 2 infant-sized objects, only one documented as living. The object in Catherine's left arm was wrapped like a child but shaped wrong, seeming to shift as she studied it. Sometimes it looked like it had a small, rounded, infant-like face, but then the shapes would appear differently and she'd notice something completely different, something that made no sense biologically. Dr. Chen from Brown University examined the new print and shared her thoughts. This could be a detailed hoax, though that seems unlikely considering the photographer's reaction and later behavior. Or it could be evidence of something the people involved truly thought was real and impossible. Catherine Hartwell either suffered a serious psychological break after her infant's death, or she encountered something beyond our current understanding of reality. "Which do you believe?" Margaret asked. Dr. Chen looked at the photograph for a long moment. "I'm a scientist. I should probably say it was a psychological break." But she pointed to the object in Catherine's left arm. "I've spent 20 years studying historical photographs. I've never seen anything like this. Its shape, the way the fabric hangs, the proportions. It's as if someone tried to make something that resembled an infant but didn't fully understand its correct form, or as if something attempted to imitate an infant but failed." Margaret felt a shiver run down her spine. "You think it's real? You believe Catherine was holding something that shouldn't exist?" "I think Catherine believed she was holding something impossible. I think the photographer believed it too. I think something happened in Providence in early 1906 that was so shocking, so impossible, that the only people who accompanied ULD record it were silenced or dismissed as insane." Dr. Chen paused. "But what really happened? What the truth is, I don't think we will ever know." Margaret published her research in a paper called The Hartwell Photograph, a study of early 20th century trauma documentation or evidence of the unexplained. The academic community was split. Some treated it as an interesting case of post-mortem photography and grief-driven delusion. Others thought the evidence was strong enough to deserve further study. The paper sparked intense debates in historical and paranormal circles. Margaret received hundreds of emails, some from skeptics insisting she admit to making it up, others from believers thanking her for highlighting what they saw as clear proof of the supernatural. But most emails came from ordinary people who had just seen the photograph and couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with it. One email stood out. It came from a woman named Elanina Pritchard, who said she was a distant cousin of Catherine Hartwell. Elanina was 83 and living in a nursing home in Vermont, and she said she had information passed down through generations. Margaret drove to Vermont the following week. The nursing home was bright and overlooking Lake Champlain, and Elanina waited in a sunny common room, a worn leather journal on her lap. "My grandmother told me about Catherine when I was a girl," Elanina said softly but steadily. "The family never spoke of her openly. Mental illness carried too much shame back then. But my grandmother felt pity for Catherine. She believed her." "Believed what exactly?" Margaret asked. Elanina opened the journal. Inside were letters, pressed flowers, and small photographs. "Catherine didn't die or vanish after leaving Butler Hospital. She moved in with my grandmother in Vermont, changed her name to Catherine Morrison, returned to her maiden name. She lived quietly, worked as a seamstress, never married again, and died in 1947 at 69. Margaret's heart raced. Did she ever talk about the photograph? Not at first, but in her last years, while dying of cancer, she told my grandmother everything. My grandmother wrote it down. Elanina turned the pages carefully, showing neat handwriting dated 1946. "Want to hear it?" Margaret nodded, speechless. Catherine said that in February 1906, her infant son James got sick. He had a high fever and cried constantly. On the third night, Catherine sat by his crib, watching him. Around 3 a.m., she dozed off. She woke to silence. The baby had stopped crying. Catherine went to the crib, hoping the fever had broken and he was sleeping, but she immediately knew something was wrong. The baby looked like James. Same size, same dark hair, same features, but a mother knows her child. The eyes were wrong, the color was correct, but they moved oddly, followed things differently, and the sounds weren't quite right, like an imitation of a baby's cry. Catherine picked the infant up. It was cold, not fever-hot like James, and its weight felt odd in her arms. She called Thomas, but he saw nothing unusual. To him, it was just their son recovered. But Catherine knew. She knew this wasn't James. She searched the house that night, finding in the cellar something wrapped in a blanket in the corner. Small, still and wrong, but shaped like an infant. When she uncovered it, she saw... Elanina paused, hands shaking slightly. My grandmother couldn't write what Catherine saw, just something trying to look human but failing. Margaret leaned forward. What did Catherine do? She brought it upstairs, showed it to Thomas, tried to make him see that their real son was gone and replaced. But Thomas refused to look carefully. He said she was hysterical, the fever had broken, James was fine. He took the bundle and burned it before she could stop him. The next day, he called the doctor. The replacement baby was examined and declared healthy. No one listened to Catherine. No one looked closely enough to see what she saw. So she went to the photographer, begging him to take pictures of both the living child and what she believed was evidence of what had happened. She had recovered pieces of the burned bundle, wrapped them again. The photographer first refused, but Catherine paid triple. She needed proof, someone else to see what she saw. When he unwrapped the bundle to arrange it, he saw what she had been trying to tell everyone. My grandmother wrote, "The photographer confirmed to Catherine that the bundle wasn't organic as expected. It seemed to be made from unknown materials, assembled to imitate but not replicate an infant." After that session, Catherine's life fell apart. Thomas had her committed. The photograph was locked away, and the child everyone thought was James grew up as Mary's brother, though Catherine knew he wasn't her son. Margaret Music sat in stunned silence. What happened to the child everyone thought was James? Ella Lenina turned more pages. He died in 1911 at age 5, sudden illness like James's in 1906. Thomas and his new wife buried him quickly, privately. Catherine said Thomas finally looked at the body and saw what she had tried to show him for 5 years. He never spoke to Catherine again. Guilt consumed him. He died in 1918. My grandmother believed partly from knowing his wife had been right. Mary, the daughter, lived until 1976, never discussed her childhood, but told her daughter she remembered a little brother who seemed wrong, who didn't play normally, who sometimes stared in a way that was unsettling. She felt relief when he died, but carried guilt for it. Margaret returned to Providence with copies of Ella Lenina's grandmother's journal. It gave context for the photograph but didn't solve the core mystery. What exactly was Catherine Hartwell holding? In March 1906, she consulted experts. A folklorist noted parallels to changeling legends, worldwide stories of supernatural children swaps. But weren't those just myths? An anthropologist said almost every culture has versions, hinting either at universal psychological responses to infant illness and death, or, more unsettling, that the stories might reflect real unexplained events interpreted through supernatural lenses. A pediatric psychiatrist explained that mothers in severe postpartum psychosis or grief can believe their child has been replaced, called Capgras delusion. Recognition is there, but they think the child is an imposter. It can be precise and persistent, but the photographer had also seen it, confirming Catherine's observations. 2 people independently reacted with horror. Margaret contacted descendants of Albert Fletcher, the photographer. His grandson in his 80s recalled family stories of the Providence incident that drove his grandfather to leave. "My father," said grandfather, "woke from nightmares, shouting about something he photographed that shouldn't exist," the grandson told Margaret. "He kept a note locked away. After he died, my father found it. It said, 'I photographed something proving we don't understand reality. I wish I hadn't.'" In 2023, Margaret arranged scientific analyses of the photograph. A forensic imaging expert studied every pixel for manipulation. Results were inconclusive. If it had been altered, it was done with skill, leaving no detectable trace. The expert noticed something strange. "Look at the light reflections," she said. "The infant in the right arm reflects normally, but the object in the left arm interacts differently. Subtle but wrong, like a material with different optical properties." A material scientist, agreed. Whatever it is, the wrapping is either not cotton or chemically treated, rare for 1906. A reconstruction artist tried to model the shape under the folds. She said, "I can't make it work. The fabric suggests a form, but any 3D model doesn't match reality. Like drawing an Escher staircase, looks correct in 2D but impossible in 3D. These findings deepened the mystery. Either it shows something genuinely abnormal, or an extremely sophisticated hoax impossible for 1906. Margaret interviewed Hartwell descendants, finding Thomas's great-granddaughter in Seattle. She knew family stories about the first wife going mad, but no details. Her grandmother, Mary, had recurring nightmares her whole life, a baby in a crib, terrifying to look at, and when seen, the baby's face was a mask. She woke screaming from childhood to death. The photograph became a phenomenon online after Margaret's paper. Paranormal enthusiasts claimed it proof of changelings. Skeptics said misinterpreted post-mortem photography or a hoax. Debate grew fierce. Then something unexpected. People reported strange experiences after viewing the photograph long. Dozens described lingering unease, dreams of wrapped bundles or wrong-looking babies, and a sense of being watched. Margaret initially dismissed it as suggestion, but a pattern emerged. People reported details unknown to them: the smell of roses, Catherine's perfume, a music box playing, the cellar's cold air. A sleep researcher examining the photograph developed severe insomnia, asking Margaret to remove it. "I'm a scientist," he said. "I don't believe in curses, but I see things in the photograph I didn't notice directly. Shapes under the fabric, expressions changing. I can't explain it." Margaret experienced it herself. Months studying the photograph, she dreamed vividly of Providence in 1906, Albert Fletcher's studio, Catherine unwrapping the bundle. Just before seeing the contents, she woke, convinced she was about to witness something that would change reality. The photograph remains with Margaret, stored in a climate-controlled, locked archive. Researchers who study it come away with more questions, some reporting similar disturbing dreams. Margaret developed a theory, mostly intuitive. She believes James died in February 1906, but something else appeared, enough like him to fool most, but recognizable to Catherine. Catherine commissioned the photograph to show what she saw. The photographer, confronted by something unexplainable, fled rather than acknowledge it. People ask Margaret, what was in Catherine's arms? She answers honestly, "I don't know." Maybe grief-induced delusion shared by two traumatized people. Maybe evidence of something beyond our understanding. Maybe both. What's certain is that something happened in Providence in March 1906, destroying lives and creating a mystery still unsolved 119 years later. The photograph hangs in Margaret's study, a silent witness. Sometimes in her peripheral vision, she swears the object in Catherine's left arm has shifted. But looking directly, it's as always, a sepia image of a woman with two bundles, her face frozen in knowledge, her secret preserved in silver and chemicals. Margaret no longer tries to solve it fully. She focuses on preserving documentation, Catherine's story, Albert's letters, medical records, scientific studies, so future researchers with better tools may find answers. She created a digital archive backed up in multiple locations, ensuring survival even if the original fades. Recently, a quantum physicist suggested consciousness might perceive aspects of reality we can't normally detect, and extreme grief could heighten this. What if Catherine and Albert saw something in a state we cannot observe? He wrote, "What if the photograph captured not just visible light, but some other aspect of reality we cannot measure?" An intriguing idea, but like all Hartwell theories, speculation. The truth remains locked in 1906. What Catherine held remains unknown. Perhaps it will never be solved. Perhaps some truths are meant to remain hidden, only seen by those who experience them, preserved in photographs that raise questions. What was in her arms? Grief-driven delusion, something impossible, hoax, or unexplainable event? The photograph shows only what was there, leaving interpretation to viewers separated by time and understanding. Perhaps that is the point. Despite science and reason, some human experiences resist explanation. The image endures, a mother, two bundles, a truth too terrible or impossible to fully grasp. Catherine Hartwell stares from 1906, eyes holding knowledge she tried to share, wrapped in layers of fabric and time. Somewhere, other photographs like this may exist, frozen moments of the impossible, waiting to be found, reminding us that reality is stranger than we imagine. If you enjoyed this video, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Subscribe and turn on notifications to catch future videos. The photograph sat silently in Margaret's study, its sepia tones muted under the protective glass, a frozen moment in time that seemed both impossibly distant and intimately present. as though it were breathing softly in the quiet room, whispering secrets of lives that had unfolded a century ago, lives that were at once ordinary and profoundly extraordinary, caught between the relentless tide of everyday existence and the uncanny, almost sacred intrusion of something inexplicable, something that defied comprehension, for in that image, with Catherine Hartwell's eyes fixed in a way that seemed to peer directly into the observer's soul, there was a presence that resisted simple categorization, an essence. Neither fully human nor wholly alien, wrapped delicately in the folds of cloth that both revealed and concealed, a paradox of texture and shape that teased the mind and unsettled the heart, inviting contemplation and fear in equal measure, demanding attention not with words but with an almost imperceptible insistence, like a melody half heard through a distant window at twilight. A song that refuses to leave the listener even after they have walked away, that follows them down empty streets and through darkened corridors of memory, so that the mundane acts of daily life, the turning of a key in a lock, the rustle of leaves in a cold wind, the distant cry of a child, the flicker of candlelight against a cracked wall, become tinged with the sense that something other is watching, that reality itself may be thinner than it appears, and that the fragile veil between what is known and what is possible may be pierced by those who dare to look closely enough, who dare to linger, who dare to trust that the quiet unease stirred by an image, a sound, a fleeting shadow, may be more than imagination, more than mere fancy. For Margaret had come to understand over long months of careful study and unrelenting curiosity that some truths do not announce themselves in bold proclamations or simple explanations, but reside instead in the spaces between certainty and doubt, in the hesitation of a hand lifted to touch something forbidden, in the pause of a breath when the eyes perceive the impossible, in the shiver that travels from the nape of the neck to the tips of the fingers when reality bends ever so slightly before collapsing again into the ordinary. And so the photograph endured as both witness and enigma, a relic of a single day in March 1906 that had unraveled lives, altered perceptions, and left echoes of fear and wonder that resonated across generations, whispers caught in the teach, reeds of family memory, in the brittle pages of journals and letters, in the creases of photographs and the fading ink of long-forgotten accounts, in dreams that refused to be dismissed, in the quiet conviction of those who had stared too long and seen too much, until it became clear that the significance of the image was not in what could be definitively proven, but in the act of witnessing itself, the profound realization that some moments, some presences, some phenomena, resist final understanding not out of malice, but out of the nature of their being, which is to exist at the boundaries of comprehension, to invite reverence, awe, and a certain terror that is inseparable from true wonder. And as Margaret gazed at the photograph now, allowing the soft light of her study to illuminate the delicate folds of the cloth, the subtle shadows cast by the contours beneath, the impossibly still gaze of the woman who had once held both the familiar and the unknowable, she felt a connection across time, across pain and loss and mystery, a link forged not in certainty, but in shared recognition of the vast uncharted spaces where reality itself trembles, where human understanding brushes against something far greater, far stranger, and far more beautiful than anything ordinary experience could provide. And she understood that the ultimate legacy of Catherine Hartwell, of Albert Fletcher, of the infant who was never really James, was not a question that could be answered, but a story that could be felt, a mystery that could be held, a truth that could be honored in the act of seeing, remembering, and bearing witness, so that even as the centuries press on and names fade from memory, even as photographs yellow and crumble, even as families scatter and stories are lost to the winds of time, there remains a quiet, persistent reminder that some fragments of the past, some glimpses of the impossible, endure not because they can be explained, but because they insist upon being seen, and in that insistence lies a beauty that transcends fear, a beauty that asks nothing more of us than to look, to notice, and to recognize the delicate trembling border between the known and the unknowable, the ordinary and the miraculous, the living and the spectral, the grief-stricken and the wonder-struck, until one realizes that perhaps the photograph, with all its unanswered questions and unspeakable secrets, exists not merely as an artifact of a particular time or tragedy, but as a perpetual invitation to acknowledge that reality is infinitely larger, stranger, and more complex than our eyes alone can perceive, that life itself is stitched together with threads of mystery, memory, and imagination, and that the role of the observer is not to solve, to reduce, or to claim dominion over what they see, but to bear witness with humility, to allow oneself to be moved and unsettled, to recognize that some experiences are sacred precisely because they cannot be contained by explanation. And in this recognition, in this willingness to dwell with uncertainty, there is a quiet, profound kind of grace, a beauty that blooms in the spaces between comprehension and wonder, a lingering echo of the lives touched, the moments captured, and the mysteries preserved, so that even now, standing before the photograph, Margaret feels the weight of all those who have gazed upon it before her, all those who have feared, doubted, mourned, or marveled, and she realizes that the photograph does not demand answers, only awareness, only presence, only a willingness to meet the impossible with open eyes and a steady heart. And as the afternoon light fades through the study window, brushing the surface of the glass with amber warmth, she allows herself a final quiet thought, that whatever Cather Ian Hartwell held in her arms, whatever Albert Fletcher captured on film, whatever mystery has endured for over a century, it exists as it always did, silent yet insistent, an eternal testament to the fragility and resilience of human perception, the inexhaustible strangeness of the world, and the enduring, luminous beauty of a story that refuses to end, because some truths are meant not to conclude but to linger, to whisper, to provoke awe and wonder in those patient enough to meet them, and in this lingering, the photograph, the lives it touched, and the story Margaret now carries forward become inseparable from the very act of seeing and remembering, a reminder that even the most ordinary moments can contain within them the extraordinary, that even grief and fear can coexist with profound beauty, and that the impossible is often the most powerful kind of presence, one that teaches patience, humility, and the quiet joy of being alive in a universe that will always, inevitably, be larger than we can ever fully grasp.